Warning: the material discussed in this show may be sensitive or a trigger for some listeners. Strong language and topics are discussed. We talk with active duty service members and practice OPSEC at all times. You have been warned.
The Bipolar DM, Jason Caughton. His show talks about Dungeons and Dragons, indie writing, and living with a mental illness, in particular bipolar disorder, borderline disorder, and major depression, among other diagnoses. Check us out right here on Saturdays, 7 p.m. Eastern, also on WLFE-DB.com, and wherever else you listen to podcasts. So take a seat, sit back, and get ready for the Bipolar DM.
Welcome to the show. I am Jason, the Bipolar DM, and this is the Bipolar DM show, where we talk about Dungeons and Dragons, indie writing, and living with a mental illness, in particular bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, and major depression, among other diagnoses. If you have any questions, comments, or topic suggestions, or if you'd like to be a guest on the show, you can email me at thebipolardm@gmail.com, or visit my webpage, www.thebipolardm.com. There you'll find previous episodes of my podcast, links to my live show, as well as resources on indie writing, Dungeons and Dragons, and mental illness. If you're a fan of the show, we also have a Facebook fan page. The handle for that is @BipolarDM. It's a little bit more up-to-date than my website just because it's an easier platform for me to work from, to post videos, articles, as well as comments and stories. Be sure to check that out. And if you're a fan of the show, we do have a private group page, and that is called The Bipolar DM Nation. And this is a private group. All you have to do in order to join is just agree to one rule, which is to respect each other. If you're able to follow that one rule, then we won't have to have 10 pages of rules in order to get in through the front door. And this group is more of a behind-the-scenes look at the Bipolar DM and the show, what it's like to live with a mental illness on a daily basis with my live updates that I do on an irregular basis, as well as comments and stories that I put up there. Check us out on WLFE-DB.com. That is our network's radio's website, as well as on Strim TV. We are listed under Variety Unlimited. So that is our show right there. We also have some other shows such as Everything Yet Nothing, Real Talk with Dom, Paratalk Radio, and many others. If you don't find something you like, there's always another show out there. We have a lot of great shows and great content for you to check out. In news and noteworthy, the next show that we have coming up next Saturday, we'll have Tammy Terrell, and she is a civilian employee working for the United States Navy overseas in Sandbox, treating our active duty sailors and their family members for various psychiatric problems. And so we're really excited about having that interview with her. She's overseas as well. Also, if you haven't had a chance to check it out, we have a new show called Bipolar Dragons, and this is where a group of us hosts from different radio talk shows on the WLFE-DB network and some others gather together and play Dungeons and Dragons. Some of the players are brand new and never played before. Others are experienced players, and everybody's having a great time. We had our first show today, and it airs on Saturdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, wherever you're watching this. Also on Twitch TV, YouTube, and as well as Facebook Live. Also, in news, I'm getting in a new laptop, so that will hopefully open up some more features that I'm able to do on StreamYard. as well as hopefully stabilize my signal so I don't have some glitchiness problems there. Right now, I'm using my iPhone to record this because my headphone jack is out on my iPad, so I can't use that right now. And so hopefully that computer will arrive tomorrow according to FedEx. And so by the time we have our next show, I should have a better audio quality going on. Also in news, one last thing. I have opened up a Patreon account so that if you're interested in supporting this show, if you're a fan of the show and would like to help us out, we have Patreon, different levels of support, and starting at $5 going up to $20 a month. And there's goodies involved with everything that you donate. So if you are a $5 member, you get access to extra content. If you're a $10 tier member, we have Bipolar DM buttons that we give out with those, and you also get the extra content. And if you're a $20 member, we have T-shirts available, such as this one right here, the Bipolar DM, and as well as the button and the extra content. So, this is all benefits of being a monthly supporter of the show. So be sure to think about that and go to patreon.com/thebipolardm and check our little page that we have there. All right, in today's show, I'm very excited that we are going to have with us Francesco Causo, I believe, Causo. I'm butchering your name, I'm sorry. Let me bring you on so we can get me corrected. All right, so
Hello,
Francesco,
hello.
correct?
Yes, so it's
And how do you,
Francesco Causo. Yeah, so Causo, just like a cow, and then so Causo.
okay,
Yeah, it's
and
very phonetic.
very obviously from your accent, you are down under. You're in Australia right now, and it's about just a little past 9 a.m., correct?
Correct, yes.
So,
Yeah, it's 9 a.m. on a Sunday here.
yeah, another day. So you're already in tomorrow. But I wanted to welcome you to the show, and the reason why I brought you on is because we got connected through Indeed, and I had read your paper, your thesis that you had done on Dungeons and Dragons, and it was really interesting because when it was first recommended to me, I'm thinking like I'm not sure how it is in colleges and universities in Australia, but in the United States, when you do a thesis, it's about 70 to 150 pages long. So when I was asked to read your thesis, I'm like, I don't know if I can read 70 pages of Dungeons and Dragons, but actually it was very concise, well written, and really laid out a good case for Dungeons and Dragons. And let's just go ahead and start first before we get into your thesis paper. What is your clinical background?
Yeah, so I am currently a clinical psychology registrar, which means in Australia, I finished up my Masters of Clinical Psychology. I've been seeing clients for the past 2 to 3 years as a student and now as a professional. And I'm sort of working towards my clinical psychology registration. Yeah.
Okay. And then what about your geek background? What's your involvement with Dungeons and Dragons prior to this paper?
Yeah, so I started playing Dungeons and Dragons when I was very little. I was probably 7 or 8, and I was invited by an older cousin to play with his friends at a table, which I thought at the time was the most cool thing I could ever do, right? All the cousins, all the group of friends. And it was only 1 or 2 sessions. They kept playing. Maybe I was deemed too young for the teams or something. And they would play really late at night as well, obviously, as you do when you're a teen.
Yeah.
So, but from that experience, I just loved Dungeons and Dragons and started playing with my junior high school friends, and just kind of sort of kept prodding along, not really understanding the rules or campaigns. And then I parked it for a very long time until 5th edition came out. And when 5th edition came out, I thought, why not? I'll give it a shot, and just stuck with me.
Yes, I love 5th edition. It's so much user-friendly than, just to date myself, 2nd edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, which I cut my teeth on, and which was a lot more math-heavy. but this is so much user friendly. And how are you got any games going on right now? Are you involved in?
We just finished a game. I was DMing Out of the Abyss. So we just finished that up. There was a 5th edition published adventure, and then I'm playing as a player in Pathfinder with a group of friends. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. And so now, how did this come? How did your paper come about? Where did you get the idea of studying Dungeons and Dragons and how it relates to therapy?
Yeah, I was really encouraged by my supervisor, which is also the second author of my article, to sort of come up with whatever I thought would be fun, relevant, sort of within a clinical, obviously, setting. And the idea probably came through just experiencing what other people did at the table, what I played with the character. I just noticed whenever I would create a character, especially after creating a few of them, they would become a bit more refined and like tackle a few psychological constructs that were relevant to me at the time. I'd seen people kind of go through grief through their characters and, experience. And I was just also really curious about how people are affected by what their characters do. It's a game, but then it has a massive ripple effect on the player. And I thought that was a fascinating sort of phenomenon. Yeah.
So what, in a nutshell, what is your thesis?
So my thesis is sort of short qualitative research where we looked at people out there who sort of describe themselves as being struggling with mental health difficulties or in recovery from them that used the game. And what we decided to do was just be curious, right? Not go in with any preconceived assumption about how they use their character or how they don't, whether there's any link between Dungeons and Dragons and mental health recovery. And we just asked sort of like really broad questions about, what do you think about Dungeons and Dragons? How do you use your character? What do you think? Is there any link between mental health recovery and Dungeons and Dragons? And I think the question we asked about this was actually not as directional as I'm making it now, because we wanted to see, is there any negative impact from playing Dungeons and Dragons on mental health? And so what we found is 13 Australian people who kind of matched the criteria we were looking for, just came through, did their interview, and then we collated the data and see what came out. And we were fascinated by finding, Dungeons and Dragons can be used or has been used by players without the help of a professional to tackle some pretty important stuff.
Yes, and it's amazing in your paper too how you broke down the participants in this study and their various diagnoses and problems they had. And really, you mentioned actually only one of the players had a negative impact through Dungeons and Dragons, and that was mostly through his own creation because he created a character who suffered from the same addiction that he did, and he allowed that character to indulge in that addiction to the point where it was becoming detrimental to the other players even. And so this kind of jumps ahead on my questions, but who would you recommend not playing Dungeons and Dragons?
That's a very good question. I am of the idea that Dungeons and Dragons can be used by everyone safely. However, there are some conditions where Dungeons and Dragons can be unhelpful. So people who have, for example, difficulties distinguishing reality from fiction.
Psychoaffective disorder, stuff like that. Yeah,
pretty much. So I think Dungeons and Dragons could create just a bit more murky waters for them to navigate their day-to-day life. As we kind of will discuss a bit maybe later, players and characters tend to bleed into one another. And so for someone who has difficulties maybe distinguishing what's real, what's not, it can be difficult to live their day-to-day life if they're then engaging with Dungeons and Dragons on a weekly basis, say, or a monthly basis. Yeah.
Right. You mentioned a term that actually pops up quite a bit, in, especially American literature, which is bleed. Why don't you go ahead and discuss a little bit about what that actually means?
Yeah, so bleed is a pretty interesting phenomenon and we've all experienced it at times, where a little bit of us pours into a character we're reading about even, or a character we're creating, the stories we make. It's sort of our own biases, our own beliefs, our own values. When we create something from scratch, it's natural that we kind of leave a little bit of an imprint of ourselves onto whatever we create. But what it's interesting with characters we create or books we write is very often that whatever we are creating also bleeds onto us. So maybe things that aren't part of ourselves start becoming part of ourselves as a result of creating them. For an example of that would be, someone who can be quite anxious in social situation can create a character who's really quite courageous, right? And just by the act of creating and thinking about what courage is, that quality can pour a little bit into that player or into the person and sort of make them feel a bit more courageous, if that makes sense.
Yes, totally. And you looked at also the character creation process in your study, in which especially how the characters and the players, how much they related to each other, because some people had done to one extreme where they had a character just like them in real life, to somebody who did quite the opposite, which was having a totally idealized character without any basis in their life whatsoever. And you found that the most benefit was the happy medium, where you have a little bit of yourself in there, but also some of the ideals that you want to strive to also.
Yeah, that's what we found, which was interesting. But that's definitely true. So back in 1988, John Hughes published this thesis about how people create their characters pretty much and how they use Dungeons and Dragons, which is very, very similar to sort of what we've done. But he goes a little bit more into how players come to create their characters. And starting, he suggested that a new player will tend to always create their ideal self, which I think it makes a lot of sense. It's sort of, if the premise of the game is you can be whatever you want to be, a lot of people will think that, well, I'll be the best I can, right?
Yeah.
And so he was commenting that he started seeing like a lot of new players will start creating sort of their ideal selves. But then as players become a bit more confident with the game, confident with what they create, he said that players create characters as symbols of themselves, whether they're aesthetic symbols, personal symbols, and sometimes cognitive symbols. So what he meant by that is they'll create characters that with one quality as a key quality and really latch onto that quality and explore it a bit more, which ultimately is really beneficial, right? Because you are playing with another perspective, you're playing with another sort of quality, like you're just exploring it to the very depth of it. And so then in my study, we found that's really helpful because it allows you to play with other people's perspective, people that might be very different from you, might have very different qualities from you. And because you're embodying them as characters, that really allows you to sort of develop a little bit of empathy at times. But then, as you said, maybe creating two different characters can be very confusing. And so in my study, I had someone who wanted to play a lizard folk, but was really unhappy with how reptilian lizard folk play, right? And so this complete disregard for sort of life and attachment and relationships. And she found maybe an in-between would help. Maybe an in-between between practicality, but still feeling connection with the rest of the party.
Right. Yeah, and that actually goes into something else I wanted to talk about, which was um, how does I guess I'm going to try to remember how I wanted to phrase this. Let's just go into something else real quick. Um, are you familiar with the term the satanic panic
Oh,
of the
yes,
80s?
yes,
Now,
yeah.
for those of you who are not familiar with it, back in the 80s, Dungeons and Dragons, along with rock music, video games, and several other things, underwent a all-out assault by the far right and the religious right, and it was dubbed the Satanic Panic because they were blaming Dungeons and Dragons on suicide, on murders, on kids worshiping the devil and demon worship and all that other nonsense. And now, did Australia ever go through something similar to that?
That's an excellent question. I would probably suspect, yes, I don't know for sure. So, I'm not originally from Australia either. So I'm from Italy originally, and I'm from a very odd
Okay.
part of Italy where um, there is a lot of it's very Catholic, as all Italy is. However, there is an appreciation for paganism, and so I suspect that Dungeons and Dragons back where I'm from back in the 80s was either completely unknown
Yeah.
or sort of was accepted with a little bit of skepticism, but not nearly as much as um, places like, the States and potentially Australia, where there was a little bit more of investigations and, riots almost. Not riots, what do they call them? Sort of where people would storm in, into a
Oh,
games night and
raids,
arrest
raids.
everybody. Raids, that's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. I
Yeah,
read something
it
really
was
funny,
crazy.
actually. Yeah. There
Yeah.
was apparently I can't remember if it was the FBI, so don't quote me on this, but whoever was doing these riots taught the D4, the little triangle shaped die, um,
Uh,
was where caltrops to kind of stop the investigation from happening. And so they had this
oh,
idea that
yeah.
players would just scatter them on the floor and run, which I thought it was really, really funny. Yeah.
I hadn't heard that, but that's actually quite funny. Yeah, there was also an FBI investigation where they described Dungeons and Dragons players as overweight, lazy, and living in their mother's basement, and or to that effect. And but was amazing about I found about the game, and especially in how it's being treated today, especially in modern psychology, is the turnaround from it, from being something that everybody feared and talked about to now something that's amazingly beneficial, which your thesis, went over was so what were some of the benefits of playing Dungeons and Dragons? We talked about empathy, we talked about being in another person's shoes. What else can somebody benefit from playing this game?
Yeah. So the ones we found in our study, that sort of the players discuss were, first of all, sort of finding space from mental health difficulties. So having Dungeons and Dragons as a sort of controlled escape from sort of the day-to-day living of mental health difficulties, which can be really helpful. However, we also discussed the fact that it shouldn't be treated as an escapism strategy, right? So living with mental
Right.
health difficulties comes up with a level of self-management that can't be ignored by just sort of sitting around the table and playing D&D. But a lot of our players found they could strike that balance. They could strike the balance between sort of finding space and living their lives. And quite oppositely, we also find that a lot of players discuss how it allowed them to safely engage with mental health difficulties. So sort of what we're discussing now, being able to discuss themes that were relevant to them and to their difficulties, but doing so with their character, right? Just experiencing it through that bleed we've discussed already, without
Right,
sort
such
of
as
letting them
character
affect
death.
so much. Yeah, that's
Right.
right.
Yeah, character death is a very profound thing that happens, especially if you've been playing with a particular character for several adventures, several campaigns, and then to lose a character, it's it can be a very emotional thing for many players.
Absolutely. And so, yeah,
go ahead.
Being able to sort of sit with that grief and experience grief, it's super beneficial, for example, to people who have difficulties experiencing grief, right? Because they can jump between this emotional state in session surrounded by other people who are feeling the same thing, but also remind themselves, wait, this is not a real person, this is a character, right? And so striking that ability to sort of sit with the emotion at the right intensity actually can give them a sense of exposure to that emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're able to sit with it and they see, actually, then, I'll think about my character for the upcoming weeks, and, but they're just a character. When it comes to real life grief, they won't be as devastated as they might have been. But they'll be able to sort of sit with that emotion of grief, appreciate it, being able to sit with remembering the person who's deceased without feeling that's a place they can't go there, right? Because they've experienced it already.
Right. And they also would have the tools and some of the practice under their belts in order to cope with something like that, as such as the death. Other things that were great, what you mentioned before, is like somebody who has social anxiety trying to portray a very charismatic character and some of the benefits of that too. So why don't you elaborate a little bit more on some of the benefits for the socially awkward?
Yeah, so we found that 9 participants out of the 13 discussed sort of Dungeons and Dragons as an opportunity to build on skills. So practice skills. And so for someone who's socially anxious, practice sort of being a bit more confident. For someone who is maybe suffering with depression or having difficulties with depression, practicing sort of getting out there and doing things no matter what, like not waiting for that motivation to kick in. And so experiencing it with that character is really, really, really helpful. I'm trying to see, there we go. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I'm just having a look if I can find a good quote that kind of captures this. For example, I have a character here who was dealing with rage, and so it's obviously playing a barbarian. And this person said, he had difficulties in real life to sort of acknowledge whatever emotion they were feeling at any time, and so they would often end up feeling anger. And so he said that, playing a barbarian allowed them to, label emotions, feel, this is my anger, and my character is angry because of this. And practicing this skill over and over through their characters allowed them to actually look at real situations in their life and be, actually, I'm angry because of this. And instead of jumping into being angry, I can problem solve around the stuff that's making me angry. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're going to go ahead and stop for a quick break, commercial break. So everybody hang tight as we go to commercial, and then we'll pick back up with Francesco.
WLFE Digital Broadcast Network is on TV. You can watch all of our shows on WLFE-DB.com. Check out our channels: Paranormal View for all of your paranormal type shows, LGBTQ Friends for all of our LGBTQ shows, Variety Unlimited for all other shows. It runs 24/7 right on WLFE-DB.com. You'll even catch the lives, all in one place. Never miss an episode, past or future. WLFE-DB.com, where our shows are your shows. Search for your favorite shows like Where's My Sage, Inside the Drag Closet, Across the Pond, Everything Yet Nothing, Paratalk Radio, Step into the Paranormal, The Creepy Parlor, Just Cindy, and more. Now you won't miss an episode. Remember, follow Facebook Live and YouTube Live. Make sure you subscribe and follow your favorite WLFE-DB radio shows. You can find our shows where you listen to your favorite podcasts, like Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and more.
WLFE DB Radio is looking for podcasts to join our family. You don't have to fit any strict genre. We're a plethora of shows. If you're looking to jump on a growing network, then contact us at WLFEDBradio@gmail.com.
Wow, Amazon Music just got a whole lot better. Your favorite shows from WLFE DB Radio can now be found there. Yes, we are on Amazon Music, found under podcasts. Download the app, find podcasts, and search all of your favorite shows. Shows like Where's My Sage? Across the Pond, Everything Yet Nothing, Skeptical Help Bar, The Creepy Parlor, Just Indie, and much more. Now you don't have to miss an episode ever. Amazon Music is WLFE DB Radiofied.
More from WLFE DB Radio Network after this.
Hey guys and dolls, this is Casey DeVille, the better half of DeVille Inc., Baltimore, Maryland. If you're ever in Baltimore, stop in and see me and Tony. Invisible Bree, 5920 Eastern Avenue, Baltimore, Maryland, 21224. Give us a call if you're in the area at 410-400-9641, or look us up on the web at DeVilleInc.com. DeVille Inc., where we specialize in you.
Oh, yeah. Life just got sweeter now that WLFE DB has merchandise. Show your support by purchasing your t-shirts for WLFE, Paratalk Radio, Inside the Drag Closet, and more. But it doesn't stop there. T-shirts, coffee mugs, tanks, buttons, cloth bags, and more. Go to WLFE-DB.com. On the top bar, click on the merchandise tab and bam, there you go. You got merch. Support the shows. WLFE-DB.com.
You're listening to WLFE DB Radio. Now, back to our program.
Welcome back. I just want to take a moment to talk about the Veterans Podcast Awards, which is coming up in October. October 5th is the date. So if you're a veteran out there who has a podcast and would like to submit your podcast for the awards, check out veteranpodcastawards.com. It's open to all branches of service, even the Puddle Pirates. Registration is going on now through July 31st. Voting begins August 7th until September 10th. So be sure to support your veteran podcasters out there. And okay, we're back with Francesco. And let's go ahead and talk a little bit about how D&D is being used in therapy nowadays. You did mention in our pre-interview that it's not so much in Australia being used openly, but in the United States, it's actually being used quite a bit now than it has been in the past.
Yeah, so I hold a little bit of skepticism on that, funnily enough, because I wrote a thesis on how helpful it is for mental health. I believe what makes Dungeons and Dragons really good is the fact that it's led by players, for players' enjoyment. It does not hold a purpose per se. You know, the purpose is decided by the players with the DM. So I find that having sort of a psychologist there sort of analyzing or directing where the players should go kind of takes a little bit of players' agency. Mm-hmm. And so I don't find that's necessarily therapeutic. However, that being said, there are a lot of role-playing games created for the purpose of therapy that I think are fantastic because they hold that as a premise. They hold that as a purpose. I know in Australia there's a big push to create sort of these role-playing games for therapy. And I know that Dungeons & Dragons can be used to sort of, as we said, practice social skills training, which is something that is done here with autism or ADHD and sort of like, kids waiting for their turn to speak or listening to what other people want to do in the room, which is incredibly beneficial and doesn't really hold too much of that therapy element per se.
Yeah.
When I'm a little bit more skeptical is maybe, someone having difficulties with, as we say, like a construct or a team, and then kind of just having a psychologist directing where they're going. I don't feel like that's necessarily the most helpful thing. But I'm really new to the area as well. So I'm sure people that do it actually have a lot of rationale for keep doing that. And I'm sure it does hold some benefits to clients. Yeah.
Yeah, and I did point you to some of the work done by Dr. Anthony Bean with Geek Therapeutics. He's been in the field.
I thought that was so interesting. Yeah,
yes, and
so
I'm
interesting.
actually going through their program right now, and then this summer I'll be taking the Game Master Therapeutics program, which is where it trains you as a dungeon master to not only be a dungeon master but to do it in a therapeutic and a directed way. And so you're not being there on the couch as the psychologist or psychiatrist, but you're there to kind of nudge the players a little bit this way, nudge them a little bit that way, or encourage them to think outside the box, especially when it comes to coping mechanisms and applying them to the situation that they're in or their characters are in. And another great program, which just got finished with their Kickstarter, is Critical Core. And Critical Core, which actually has a lot of crossover with Geek Therapeutics, because a lot of the doctors that worked on Geek Therapeutics book also worked on Critical Core. Critical Core is structured for children on the autism spectrum. And it's a design 5th edition rules-based game, role-playing game, with that in mind and having for players that are on the autism spectrum. And I got that one, the digital copy of that, and read through that, and it's a lot of great stuff in there. I wish there was more, to be honest, especially with how long I waited for it to come out. Versus, Geek Therapeutics' book, right here, the paperback copy, which is all this about just geek culture and all that. I was hoping for a lot more out of Critical Core, but the stuff they do have is some great stuff. And so, in the United States, we're really running out there, hopefully not into traffic, but we're really running out there with Dungeons and Dragons and seeing what we can do with this tool and making it a benefit for so many more people. Personally, I got a game that I'm trying to get off the ground called Dungeons and Dog Tags, where I'm playing with soldiers and Marines and airmen and sailors that are in Iraq and Afghanistan. Because when I was in the military, that was one of the things we did to unplug and unwind was play Dungeons and Dragons. And so the benefits of giving those guys in the sandbox the chance to unplug from reality and the mission they were just on and go into the world of fantasy and be able to deal with their issues then and there a lot of times too, instead of taking it back home. There's a lot of benefits in that, and really excited about that and excited about where Dungeons and Dragons is going. Now, getting back to gameplay and your experience with Dungeons and Dragons, in what ways has the pandemic affected Dungeons and Dragons and how it's being played now in Australia?
Yeah, we've been incredibly lucky in Australia. We've nearly had no COVID, with some cases and some deaths, unfortunately, but nowhere near the scale of the rest of the world. So for a little bit, I think early on, back last year in March and April, obviously we all jumped up online. It gave me the opportunity to reconnect to friends from another city I used to play. And so we started again playing online, and we played Out of the Abyss. But at the moment, I think people are happy to go back to face-to-face, and they can do that safely. Yeah. So I think we've probably had the least impact, but I've heard maybe the States has changed a lot as a result.
Yeah, we haven't played since February of last year in a face-to-face game. And so we've been playing all virtually, like through Discord, stuff like that. But actually to touch on that part right there, the face-to-face, what is the benefits of face-to-face that you're not really getting so much in a virtual tabletop?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I've missed the opportunity to sort of look into that a little bit more in my research. But my understanding of it from what I'm seeing now is that people do miss out on reading sort of body language, especially if it's done on a software where you don't need to have your webcam on. People will miss some body language, will miss some sharing the space, which is actually, that's really, really nice. There's something nice about having a group of friends, maybe sharing dinner, sharing pencils, sharing dice, so players miss a little bit on that body language. And sometimes I think it's easier to get distracted. And so it's easier that players will jump on the phone, the DM will be less focused. And I think that takes away from that experiencing things, which we're saying actually is really beneficial. And so, if there's a scene, just because we discuss grief, if there's a scene discussing grief, if someone is really uncomfortable with that, it's easier to jump on the phone. When face-to-face, actually, they can just kind of look down but listen and be present. Or say, this is really uncomfortable. Yeah, putting boundaries in place. That's really helpful. And that I think that misses, there's a missed opportunities by doing that online. However, it allows us to play whenever we want, with as many people as we want, from different cities. So there's definite benefits there.
Yeah, just recently I was at GaryCon, which is celebrating the life of Gary Gygax, our patron saint. And I got to play about 16 hours of online Dungeons and Dragons, and I had a blast. And that's where I actually got my inspiration for Dungeons and Dog Tags I was playing with people from Germany. I had people from all over the United States, some other countries too, just coming to the table. And it was amazing that we were able to do this, no matter where we were at. There was no way before the pandemic we could have done this kind of stuff. Now, yes, I miss and can't wait for playing in player again. I just cannot wait for that day when I can go to the comic book store, order a couple of pizzas and some sodas, and have several hours of just playing Dungeons and Dragons and trash talking each other. And I think that's the biggest draw. One of the biggest draws of Dungeons and Dragons is the social aspect of it, because it is very much a social among the other many things that it is. And to be able to participate in it has been a very benefit of my life, especially when I was in high school. Was very rough on me, and it was the fact alone that I had friends in Dungeons and Dragons that I was able to pull through that and get through that rough time in my life. And how did you in your own life have any kind of similar experience with difficulties in Dungeons and Dragons helping you through it?
Personally, I wouldn't say I can't identify something huge. However, I do have characters that sort of represent where I'm at instead of life stages. There were definite times where I had a lot of rigid structure around me in terms of university courses and sort of fees to be paid for uni and, work. And I remember creating a character that embodied the exact opposite of that. It was a very, very chaotic, free, live and let live in the present sort of thing. And that actually was really, really helpful to have that opportunity to be that and explore that in a controlled way without letting it sort of go rampage on my life.
Consequences.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, without
and it was so that was really helpful. But something you touched on that was really good is that social aspect, because that's something that definitely rings true to me and the participants in my study. Sort of these relationships that form at the table are actually go beyond the game. And a lot of people will start making friends and hang out with them, maybe even stopping playing role-playing games with them. but maintaining those friendships. And I think that's really, really good. And, we know that, having a good social sort of support, it's a great protective factor from sort of experiencing the worst of mental health difficulties.
Yeah. One of my ideas is that, you don't have to have a severe mental illness to enjoy or get benefits from Dungeons and Dragons, because, you and I seem to represent the opposites of the spectrum, where I suffer from bipolar and borderline, which is a wicked combination, and you're kind of on the other end, but we both have benefited greatly from Dungeons and Dragons in our life, whether in some marked way. And that's a great thing about this game, is that no matter where you're in your life, no matter how big your problems are or how little you think they are, there's a place for you at the table at Dungeons and Dragons, and for you to be able to have a chance to work through that.
Absolutely. And that sort of kind of goes back to the point I was making about, I think everyone could benefit from Dungeons and Dragons. I think the difference is how we use it. And so, some people might have the capacity to go into really raw, really difficult teams, really awful teams, and be fine with it because they want to experience that. Other people might find that's really triggering, and that's okay. That's okay too. It doesn't make one person better on the other. It's a matter of just experiencing new things, exploring perspectives, exploring, different worlds. And it's definitely the only time I see people really being bored with the game is if they're not doing that, if they're sort of either doing the same thing over and over or don't have any interest in sort of exploring something new. And so they sort of sit at the table and be like, this is not for me, which is also really fine.
Yeah. And let's just kind of step away now into a different aspect of the game. As a dungeon master, what are some of your house rules that you have? For me, I have a house rule where cell phones are only used for Dungeons and Dragons, or respect. Respect is the number one rule. Respect yourself, respect the dungeon master, respect your fellow players. And that kind of covers a whole litany of other rules that you don't have to go over, such as playing on your cell phone, playing with your dice, stuff like that. So what kind of house rules do you have at your table?
I don't have a defined house rule. However, I am pretty fresh as a DM. So I've been thinking I should probably start making some. But something that's really important to me that I'll make sure throughout the campaign I give space to is just communication between players and between DMs and players. I want to make sure they're having fun. I want to make sure we're not touching on anything that's too difficult. And I also want them to be able to say, hey, I know this happened in between characters, but that really hurt me. I think that's really important to have that conversation. There's definitely been time when we have a bit more chaotic player really playing against the rest of the party. And then I've had players come to me and be like, hey, what's up with this person? And I encourage actually communication between players. And, is there something there? Because often there isn't. But then it's important for the player to hear, what I'm doing through my character is actually hurting the player of those other characters.
Yeah.
And so I prefer everybody sort of having a good time and still giving that space for their more chaotic, oppositional sort of persona to exist, but within sort of a more safer space. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, communication definitely is a big one because with modern technology, there's really no excuse for not having good communication nowadays. With Messenger, Facebook, I mean, you can make a Facebook group just for your players to disseminate information. And I personally use Messenger for that purpose. And so, yeah, I totally agree with that communication is big. Now, in recent years, especially the past year, has there been a huge growth or a marked growth of Dungeons and Dragons in Australia?
Yes, massively. And I think it was the combination of 5th edition coming out, which, as we said, is kind of a bit more simpler and user-friendly, a bit easier for new players to get into. And then the show Stranger Things was really popular here too. I think that revamped a lot of interest into Dungeons & Dragons. So definitely during those times, there were sort of 2 very quick growth spurts in a short period of time. And so it became incredibly popular. There's a lot more conventions. Nearly every game shop that has the capacity to host tables, will do so. Yeah.
And then, we've had similar growth too, especially after 5th edition. Had the show Critical Role make it over there to Australia. I know there's Critters over there, but are you familiar with that show?
Yeah, I'm familiar with the show. I am quite bad at sitting and watching something for a long period of time. That's just me.
Yeah.
But I wish I could just to be able. Yeah. So Critical Role is a great one. Dimension 20 is another popular one that I really enjoy. Yeah. So, and I think as we were saying that, I was actually thinking the pandemic in an odd way has been really healthy for the game because people have had more opportunities to sort of sit down at home and either watch shows or start maybe a game they never had time to start before. And
give them a chance to try something new, especially when all there is to watch is Korean baseball and dog sledding. The 2 biggest sports in America right now is the Adiron up in Alaska, which is a dog sled race, and Korean baseball, until now things have started back up again. But for a while, those were like the 2 biggest sports because they're the only sports that weren't affected by the pandemic.
Yeah.
The growth of D&D and those shows have been great because one of the things that I found with Dungeons & Dragons is because of the storytelling nature of it, it blends so well with online streaming and especially with people who like to watch stories. And we just started I had mentioned a show called Bipolar Dragons, where we're playing, it's a bunch of us hosts playing Dungeons & Dragons together, and we have a varying degree of player experience from never playing a day in their life to experienced players playing for years. And we just had our first episode. Only 2 players showed up. So I managed to get them through the adventure for that day without a TPK or a total party kill. And it was great. It was great. It went off pretty well. And I'm really excited about, doing more of that. Have you thought about or have you done online streaming of your games?
No, I think that's not necessarily for me. I think streaming is something that's a little bit anxiety provoking to me. So I haven't done that. I haven't think about doing that. No. And as I said, I do prefer probably face to face, and it requires a bit more equipment to do that. If you decide to do it face to face, a lot more cameras. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just for this, I've got a little simple setup, but if I wanted to include more in the Dungeons and Dragons game, I definitely need a second camera for the minis. I need a soundboard for the sound effects, and so it can get quite expensive doing these online games, especially if you're doing like Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds, those online platforms, those virtual tabletops, because you got to buy everything, all the tokens and the maps and the features that you want to use on that. And it's been great for a lot of people. I have played on Roll20. I have played on Fantasy Grounds. I'm very familiar with them, but I'm old school. I like dice and paper. We use real dice on our game and not D&D Beyond or a dice bot because we do the honor roll because bad rolls are great for stories too. Just like in therapy, bad rolls are great for you to be able to say, all right, how am I going to flip this around and turn towards my benefits, or not my benefit, but to lessen the blow, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking while you were saying that even like sort of bad stats have started to actually be recognized as something that's really good, makes a character a lot more human, a lot more flawed, in a way. So having sort of a dump stat that is not just a dump stat, but it means something to that character. I think that's really cool. I think that's something that we can't take away. Yeah.
Okay, we got just a few minutes left, and I just want to go to the audience. And if there's anybody out there right now that's watching that has any questions for us, go ahead and shoot those in the comments right now, and we'll love to answer them. While we're doing it, is there anything we haven't talked about that you would love to bring up?
Let me have a look. I think mostly. No, I think we've discussed most of the very important things. I guess my only other point is that recovery is sort of like non-linear, and so like the type of role, like Dungeons and Dragons or any other adaptive activity, even exercise, play for a person really also depend on where they're at with their recovery. And as we were saying, because it's non-linear, sometimes you can sort of live your life without almost forgetting, like, you've got a mental health diagnosis, and then you're living your life to like whatever the best you can. But then there are times when maybe you may go back to like sort of despair, and sort of like the role, the game, or any other adaptive activity may change. And I think it's really important to reflect that, like, maybe sometimes you might have a period of time, a period of 2 years, where like the last thing you want to do is playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Right.
And that can mean both good things and bad things. It can mean like, you really don't need it because you always use it sort of maybe as a crutch, or you don't want to play because you really can't find the motivation and support to start it. And so I think it's really important to always sort of giving these adaptive activities and things that have helped another go. Even if you feel like it's not the right time. And so what I mean by that is at times when you might feel like, this thing I really enjoy doing, whether Dungeons and Dragons or not, now I really don't want to do. It's worth giving it a go. Because if it's a matter of not wanting to do it because you're in sort of the worst of a recovery, then that might actually be the thing that pushes you out. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. Greatly appreciate you. And I'm going to go ahead and put you in the back. I'm going to go ahead and put you in the back. I'll do the closing, and then we'll talk for just a little bit afterwards. So thank you again. And we really had a great time with this interview.
Sweet. Thank you.
Okay. All right, that's coming to the end of the show. I want to thank everybody who's been watching live. Greatly appreciate you. And for those of you who are now just picking this up, either on the podcast through Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcast, Amazon Music, or other places that carry this podcast, thank you for tuning in and listening to the Bipolar DM show. I am the host, Jason. If you have any questions, comments, or would like to be a guest on the show, you can email me at thebipolardm@gmail.com or visit my webpage, www.thebipolardm.com, where you'll find my previous episodes of my podcast, links to the live show, as well as resources on indie writing, Dungeons and Dragons, and living with a mental illness. One other thing, or two other things I want to mention first, is the 22 a day, hashtag 22 a day. Every day, 22 veterans of the armed forces commit suicide. And we need to end this stigma and get our soldiers and sailors and Marines and airmen help. And so I want to encourage all of you that are out there, if you're having a crisis going on right now and you need to talk to somebody, there is somebody out there to talk to. There's a crisis help hotline. If you're a veteran, you dial 1-800-273-8255, press 1, and it'll direct you straight to a qualified individual who is trained to help you through your particular issues as a veteran. Also, we are members of the Safe Space, and really proud to be part of that. And so as a safe space, we are a virtual safe space for people, whether you're from the LGBTQ community, whether you're from the geek community, whether you're a veteran. whoever you are, whatever your background is, we're a safe space for you to go to if you need help, if you need to talk to somebody. We're not psychiatrists. We're not psychologists. We're just here to listen. We don't judge. And so if you are interested in finding out more information about the safe space or the resources that we have available, go to WLFE-DB.com and you click on the Safe Space button. All right. Thank you so much again for tuning in. This is the Bipolar DM and telling you all, remember, take your meds.
Thank you for listening to the Bipolar DM. They love sharing thoughts and ideas. See you next week, 7 p.m. Saturdays on WLFE-DB.com, where our shows are your shows, and that makes for great talk radio. WLFE Digital Broadcast Network is on TV. You can watch all of our shows on WLFE-DB.com. Check out our channels. Paranormal View for all of your paranormal type shows. LGBTQ Friends for all of our LGBTQ shows. Variety Unlimited for all other shows. It runs 24/7 right on WLFE-DB.com. You'll even catch the lives, all in one place. Never miss an episode, past or future. WLFE-DB.com, where our shows are your shows.